I do not care about these random characters. I did not read Bridgerton for regular spicy scenes. I read it because I want to fall in love with the characters. There's something that needs to be built up there that just has not been built up yet. There needs to be more time with the main lead. Stop going with the side stories, please. I have a lot to say about the new season of Bridgerton. I'm a sucker for a good love story, whether that be in book form, movie form, or whatever else form. So when Netflix originally released the first season of Bridgerton, I was instantly hooked to the point where I ended up buying every single book in the series. And boy howdy, did I devour that series. It was so well written, and I fell in love with each of the Bridgerton siblings as well as all of their love interests. I'm actually currently reading the Smith-Smythe spin-off series from the same author. I love Bridgerton, both the book series and the television series, and even though there were some major differences, I genuinely enjoy them both in different ways. I was already mentally prepping for how much Season 3 Part 1 would diverge from the books, since at this point they've taken big leaps in ways of side stories, but I'm excited because even if it's not the same, I'm sure it'll be good, right? If you don't know who I am, my name is Julie Q. I'm a variety streamer over on Twitch who has a lot of opinions about a lot of different subjects, and today I wanted to discuss Bridgerton Season 3 Part 1, thanks Netflix for the Part 1, and how it made me feel seeing such a beloved book series be put on the big screen. Before watching Season 3, I knew I wanted to catch up on Seasons 1 and 2. I've also seen the Queen Charlotte spin-off, but I won't be touching on anything from that season in this particular video. Rewatching Seasons 1 and 2, I re-fell in love with the characters and the setting. I may be a bit biased, as I do prefer Season 1 to Season 2, just because of how much focus was on the two main characters, Daphne Bridgerton and Simon Hastings. You are introduced to Daphne's other siblings, who will eventually become the main cast, just as what happened in the books, but overall the spotlight and most of the screen time is spent with Daphne and Simon. Their love story is in line with the trope of, we have a mutual goal, which isn't being together, but let's pretend like we are together. So basically a fake relationship to a real relationship trope. Season 2's trope, whose main characters are Anthony Bridgerton and Kate Sharma, is basically a story of enemies to lovers. Season 2's side stories now delve further into Penelope Featherington, who is the main character of Season 3, and Eloise Bridgerton's secret lives. Now, unlike Season 1 and 2, Season 3 will be broken into two parts. I will only be reviewing the first part of Season 3 because at the time of this video's release, Part 2 is not out. But don't worry, I will be back for a Part 2. Now that you have a very, very short recap of Season 1 and 2, let's jump into how I felt about Season 3. Personally, I was very excited for Penelope and Colin's love to blossom in this season. I love the friends to lovers trope. I think it's so wholesome, so cute, but that's not necessarily the vibe I got from the TV show. This show is also significantly different from the books. So now I'm going to rant about some of the differences that made me want to pull my hair out, just stepping into the first episode of Season 3. One of the main things was Penelope was not called out as Lady Whistledown until somewhere near the middle to end, I want to say, of book 4, which is her and Colin's book. And the first one to discover this revelation was actually Colin, not Eloise, which was a huge plot point that caused him to become very protective of her and flip the script on their relationship. I was definitely curious how this change would affect the storyline, since Eloise is now in the series the one to discover the secret before Colin in the show. Also, while Penelope and Eloise are close in the books, the real outspoken do my thing character is actually Hyacinth in the books, not Eloise. Crazy, right? Eloise's character in the show in comparison to the books is so incredibly different, and while she is still a unique and free-spirited character, I felt personally when reading the books that Hyacinth meant the TV show's Eloise more than the books Eloise met Eloise, if you followed that. Eloise also married a man she only technically ever wrote to, never actually met, and while she was comfortable being unmarried, at least until Penelope married in book 4, because Eloise's book is book 5, her marriage to Sir Philip, oh yes, Eloise marries that Sir Philip that is currently in the show married to Marina. On top of that, there's the big difference between Marina in the show versus Marina in the books. Marina in the books is actually only introduced in book 5 as Sir Philip's deceased wife, who he had children with, which is obviously very unlike what happened in the TV show. since Marina in the show was introduced in season 1 as someone who lives with the Featheringtons, was already pregnant, etc., etc. I'm assuming that if Marina's fate is the same as the books, that the show did this in order to give the audience a more meaningful and empathetic perspective of her character, especially looking at how they treated Francesca and Sir John thus far. I know I'm rambling, so now let's actually talk about the new season. But first, let me show you my genuine reaction to right after watching it, specifically the ending, specifically the carriage scene.
I finished season 3, part 1. Oh my god, it was so good. The ending was so good.
So now let's break down how I felt. It's not like the book at all, which is not necessarily a bad thing, but it is sad because it means we'll never see the book play out in the same way on a screen, you know? But I do like the direction that the TV show takes regarding what may have happened in the past before the characters' books took place, since the book's whole focus is only ever on the two main love interests rather than anyone really outside of them. For instance, like I said earlier, Francesca's book's love interest, Michael, happens because of John's death, so it's very fun, interesting, depressing to see the TV's interpretation of what happened in the timeline between the books. When he was wicked, Francesca's book simply offered it up as John is dead. And although they talk about it, we never get to see him and her actually coexist together. Now, that statement is simplifying it, as John's death does bring Francesca and Michael closer, and it's a very important element to their story. However, to us, the reader, John is just an entity that propels Francesca and Michael's love forward. Another point I'd like to break down of something that happened in the show, but not in the books, is the love triangle between Penelope, Colin, and Lord Debling. Lord Debling did not exist in the books, period, and was made purely to pull Colin and Penelope closer together in the TV series. I don't know why Shondaland loves love triangles so much, since they also did the same thing in season 1, adding the prince, a character who was once again created only for the TV series and was meant to draw Daphne and Simon closer. At least Edwina existed in the book series, but I'd love to see not a love triangle in the future seasons. There's so many other ways to create drama or create jealousy, so I don't understand why we continuously get a love triangle, especially when they're not a part of the book series at all. Unfortunately, too, I actually really enjoyed Lord Debling and the prince as characters. I felt a little deflated watching how Lord Debling's time with Penelope ended, at least what we know so far. We finally had a potential suitor that saw Pen for who she actually was and admired her for it. It's similar to the prince. He was a nice guy who had the same values as Daphne. It may be because I'm a little jaded as I've gotten older, but these are genuinely nice, kind, unproblematic men, and you're telling me that the main lead ends up choosing the more problematic option? I gotta say, when Portia Featherington said, "Do you know what is romantic? Security?" I wholeheartedly agree. It's kind of like when you get older and you rewatch The Little Mermaid and agree with King Triton instead. Like, sit down, Ariel. You're literally a child. Before I move away from the topic of these unnecessary love triangles, I also want to say that Lord Debling in particular, I almost wish that he would have been introduced to Penelope sooner in the series, even if it was just to take the wallflower away from the wall for a moment in season 2. I think it would have made us sympathize even more with this love triangle. I'm holding out hope, though, that he will find a good lady. However, seeing as we never get to see what actually happens to the prince in season 1, I'm not very hopeful. Moving along to my next qualm of differences between the TV show and the book series, I feel like it's disappointing seeing just how much screen time went into the side characters during this season. In season 1, we saw side stories happening, of course, but so much of that focus went onto Daphne and Simon, whereas with season 2, they pulled away from that line of thought. Watching season 3 was no different, and was possibly even more worse off with that stuff than season 2 was, which is unfortunate because I really liked season 1. I liked season 1 more than season 2 because it focused so heavily on Daphne and Simon's love story, and I know a lot of people would agree. It felt like a majority of the screen time in season 3 so far, at least, was pushed into characters that just weren't Colin and Penelope. And it would be one thing if the side stories still ultimately revolved around the two main characters, but they just don't at all. Thinking back to the side stories, we have our Eloise and Cressida, Francesca and John, Violet and Marcus, as well as Marcus and Lady Danbury, the Mondrish family, Benedict and the widow, and finally, Portia and her daughters. The only one, to me at least, that pushes along the main characters is the Portia, Philippa, and Prudence side story, which is also my favorite of the side stories this season. Those characters honestly flourished, and they were always entertaining to watch, but this season in particular, not only were they cracking me up, their stories and their personalities enhanced the main conflict in both direct and subtle ways. This side story is what encourages Penelope's drive to find a husband this season. Their side story is what gives us so much more insight to Penelope's feelings. The way Pen is treated by her mother and her sisters is seen directly by the viewers. We actually get to see directly how Pen feels about the way she's being treated and looked down upon by her family. We see why she has become the lady that she is. We see why she is striving to change both externally and internally. This is the way that I believe most, if not all, of the side stories should be in the upcoming seasons. They should enhance the main lead story rather than be a story so completely outside of the main leads. My last and final big qualm with this season. Why were there so many unnecessary spicy scenes? I was so excited for this season to the point that I had been watching the Bridgerton cast doing interviews and preparations for the upcoming season, and so many of these interviews were the cast hyping up the heat, the passion of these fictional roles, that this would be more than any other season. And maybe they were right in one way, but not in the way that I, as a viewer, was expecting, and so I felt disappointed. A majority of these spicy scenes were just there to be there, rather than be placed into the show well. Sure, episode 4 left us with a great one, an amazing one even, taken straight from the book, but otherwise, the rest of them left me feeling like I was watching Game of Thrones rather than Bridgerton. Kate and Antony's spicy season 3 scenes tried to make up for the lack of any more explicit scenes that we got from season 2. Benedict is just being a rake for the sake thereof of being a rake, as they keep introducing us to more and more ladies that go nowhere. At least Antony's scenes with Sienna in season 1 serve the purpose of propelling him towards his feelings of marrying not for himself, but rather for his family and out of principle, making way for season 2's Antony to act as he did. And Colin also was just being a rake to be a rake, which in my opinion was just for the series to simply show us more spicy scenes. There was no need for a menage a trois. I do not care about these random characters. I did not read Bridgerton for regular spicy scenes. I read it because I want to fall in love with the characters and then see their passion ignite in ways that leave me squealing and kicking my feet. If I wanted to watch a scene just to watch a scene, there's so many other places I can go to. I want the build-up. I want the emotional attachment, not random spicy scenes for the sake thereof. But boy, was this season, at least thus far, just absolutely littered with spicy scenes for no reason. Now let's talk about what I'm most curious for going forward into season 3 part 2. I'm so impatient and I wish it were out already, but this month-long hiatus will give me plenty of time for speculation. So here are some of my initial thoughts. First off, even though it isn't Eloise's season, and she likely won't be a main lead for a bit, this season really has me wondering if it's going to go completely off the rails from what we saw in the books. I've read theories on Reddit about Cressida and Eloise, that they could be a potential change pairing, or possibly Theo and Eloise. In all honesty, although I am excited for part 2 to divulge more about it, I think Eloise is the one character I could accept being different from the book Eloise, as they've already made it abundantly clear that she has a different personality. So I'm actually pretty excited to see just how unlike book Eloise that the TV Eloise will be. On the topic of Eloise, I also don't know how I feel about Eloise right now, given where we're at in the story. I'm pretty upset by how she's treating Pen. Sure, Eloise has a right to feel cheated that her friend kept this major secret from her, but on the flip side, although she scandalized you to some degree, when you really think about it, there was no other way to get the queen off of your heels. In season 2, the queen had decided that Lady Whistledown must be Eloise, even though that wasn't the case. And the queen being the queen, she had the ability to ruin the Bridgerton family. Pen couldn't stand by and simply watch that happen to her friend. Although outing Eloise and Theo was not nice, what other option was there, really? I'm left feeling similarly about Eloise to how I felt about Edwina when looking at her treatment towards Kate. The other was just looking out for you. Can you not see that the best of intentions were there, even if they were somewhat misguided? Can't you see that that person cares about you? Aside from Eloise as a whole, I am really hopeful that the rest of Penelope and Colin's story will not diverge too far from the books. I'm hopeful that part 2 will be a closer telling to the original, with Pen encouraging Colin to find himself and Colin falling madly, deeply in love with Pen. My favorite parts about this series is when it doesn't stray too far from the originals, because I genuinely enjoy the originals. So I'd really like it if it followed the book series a little bit more, because dang, did that carriage scene make an impact, and guess where it came from? The book! The last thing I want to do is just kind of yap for a bit about the season as a whole, rather than just comparing it to something. I wanted more Pollen, and that was the ship of Colin and Penelope. The build-up wasn't enough. The focus on them just was not enough. I feel, as a viewer, that I didn't get to see what I should have gotten to see from them. I feel like I missed a whole episode or two. 4 episodes, speaking of that, not enough for part 1. Why did they split it from part 1 to part 2 when it's 4 episodes? All that is 4 hours of my day. If it was a 16 episode show where they split it in 8 and 8, I feel like, okay, part 1, part 2 makes sense. But 4 episodes that I totally did not call out of work to watch, 4 episodes, it should have been more. I don't think we needed a part 1 and part 2 for 4 episodes. Also, just in general, I don't feel like we got enough Penelope and Colin for part 1 to then lead into part 2. Like, maybe if more of the story had been focused on the main leads, I would have felt differently. But Netflix, why? Why did you do this to us? I don't understand. Also, Colin's a playboy now, and I just hate it. Antony's made so much sense. And Benedict's makes sort of sense too, because, you know, he's our free-spirited, fun-loving character here, even though I don't love his either. But Colin in particular was never like that. He never came across as that. And I think that that's somewhat the point of making him more rakish, is that they want to show that he is trying to be someone he's not by doing these things and fitting in more with gentlemen in that way. But it doesn't make sense. I hate it. You didn't need to include it. I really just hate I'm going to keep saying menage a trois. I hated that scene. It felt uncomfortable. It felt awkward. I feel like it just did it to add more spicy scenes. It just felt unnecessary. And I hated it. I hated that part. Absolutely despised that part. In the case of side stories, I literally did not care about the Mondrishes. I forgot them while I was writing the script that I kind of used for this video. I just forgot they existed and had to put them in last minute. I don't understand why that side story is happening right now. Like, maybe it's going to lead into something, but right now it just feels unnecessary. I do, however, love that Violet might, get her a new man. I love that. I'm appreciative of that because Violet deserves it. She is a wonderful lady. Love that side story. Cressida and Eloise, I don't know how I feel about it. There's portions I like, but I also don't like. I don't know how I feel about that one yet. I think that I would maybe know better how to feel about it, or maybe like it even, if we had some flashbacks to the summer that they spent together and became friends, because how did that friendship even start? Very confused on that. And on the topic of flashbacks, why, if it's a friends to lovers romance, didn't you put more flashbacks? You could have put flashbacks about maybe spots where Colin really does notice Pen, but he doesn't realize it completely, or vice versa. You can actually see the first time that Pen starts to fall in love with Colin. They could have used that flashback so much more for this friends to lovers series. That could have been so much better for the build-up of Colin and Penelope too as a couple, because there's something that needs to be built up there that just has not been built up yet, and it's unfortunate that it hasn't been. There needs to be more time on the main leads. I'll say it again. There needs to be more time with the main leads. Stop going with the side stories. Please stop with the side stories. At least so many of them, or so many unnecessary ones, at least have them link up to the main leads. It's so frustrating. That's so frustrating. So frustrating. Overall, I really am excited for part 2. And watching part 1 has made me want to reread Romancing Mr. Bridgerton. While I do have qualms with some of the major changes made to the overall story, like Eloise being the first one to find out about Penn being Lady Whistledown, I think overall it is still a really good television romance. I really hope we get more of Paul and Bean together in love in the next part. Let me know what you thought about the season of Bridgerton down in the comments. I love to yap about my passions, and romance books and shows are just one of those passions. So if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and suggest some other shows or books that I might like. And until next time, gentle reader, bye-bye!